People always tell you that weddings bring out the best in families, but in my case, it brought out the worst. My name's Claire, I'm 29, and a few months ago I found myself standing in the middle of what should have been the happiest day of my life, only to realize my mother-in-law had made it her personal mission to humiliate me. It started long before the ceremony itself, though. From the very moment I got engaged to Daniel, I could sense the shift in his mother, Linda. At first, I thought it was just nerves. Maybe she was sad her son was growing up. Maybe she didn't like that he was starting his own family. But it didn't take long to see the truth. Linda didn't just dislike me. She despised me. And she wasn't subtle about it either. The digs came in small, sharp comments disguised as jokes. "Oh Claire, you're really going to wear that color? Not very flattering with your skin tone, but if you're confident, that's what matters." Or, "I hope you're taking cooking classes, dear. Daniel has a sensitive stomach, you know." At family dinners, she'd pour him wine and forget to pour mine. At Christmas, she gave me a cookbook titled Meals Even Beginners Can't Mess Up, while everyone laughed uncomfortably. I told myself to let it roll off my back. This was the woman who raised the man I loved. I wanted peace, not war. Daniel would squeeze my hand under the table whenever she crossed the line, whispering later, "Ignore her, Claire. She'll come around." But she didn't. If anything, the closer the wedding got, the worse it became. The rehearsal dinner was my first real warning that Linda wasn't just going to make sly little comments, she was going to escalate. We were all gathered at a restaurant, our families mingling, laughing, raising glasses. I stood to thank everyone for coming, my heart full, when Linda's voice sliced through the air. "Well, let's hope tomorrow Claire can actually get her vows right. She always gets so nervous speaking in public." The room went silent. My cheeks burned. I had never once mentioned stage fright. I was a teacher, for crying out loud. Public speaking was my strength. But that didn't matter to Linda. She wanted to plant doubt, to twist the knife in front of everyone. Daniel shot up from his chair. "Mom, that's enough." But she just smiled sweetly, swirling the wine in her glass. "I'm only joking. Don't be so sensitive." That was her favorite line. Don't be so sensitive. As if humiliating someone was perfectly fine as long as you called it a joke afterward. I should have known then. Should have realized that if she could throw that punch at the rehearsal, she had something bigger planned for the wedding itself. The morning of the ceremony, I woke up with that heavy knot in my stomach that told me trouble was coming. My bridesmaids were buzzing around the room, adjusting veils, curling hair, laughing nervously. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "You look beautiful, sweetheart. Don't let anyone ruin today for you." Her words stuck with me. But when I stepped into the church an hour later, veil draped over my face, the hum of conversation filling the air, I caught sight of Linda, and I froze. She was standing near the front, her smile too wide, her eyes glinting with something that wasn't joy. Her dress wasn't the soft pastel she'd promised. It wasn't even a respectful muted tone. It was white. Not ivory. Not cream. White. Floor-length satin, rhinestones glittering under the light, as if she had mistaken my wedding for her own. Gasps rippled through the pews as people noticed. A bridesmaid hissed, "Is she serious right now?" My hands started to shake. She had done it. The ultimate humiliation. Linda turned slowly, caught my eye, and smirked. And in that single moment, I knew. This wasn't going to be a quiet battle in whispers anymore. This was war, and she had just declared it in front of everyone. The church was full, every pew crammed with family, friends, co-workers, and neighbors who had all come to witness what should have been a simple, joyful union. But all anyone could look at was Linda in her blinding white gown. I felt the weight of dozens of eyes flicking between me and her, whispers buzzing like flies. My veil suddenly felt suffocating, like I couldn't get enough air. Daniel noticed my hand trembling in his. He leaned in, whispering, "Ignore her. You're the bride. No one will remember her stunt." But I knew he was wrong. People would remember. That was the point. We walked down the aisle anyway, the music swelling, the photographer snapping away. I forced a smile, but inside I was boiling. Every step I took, I could see Linda in the corner of my eye, her smirk growing sharper. She wasn't just trying to ruin my day, she wanted to own it. The ceremony began, the pastor's voice steady, the candles flickering. I tried to focus on Daniel's eyes, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. That helped, until Linda struck again. When the pastor asked if anyone had objections, a hush fell over the church. For a moment, everything was still. Then Linda gave a dramatic cough, loud enough to echo, and muttered just loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Well, I suppose it's too late now." Gasps. A few muffled chuckles. My stomach dropped. She wasn't objecting outright. Oh no, she was smarter than that. She was planting seeds of doubt, making it seem like I wasn't good enough for her son. Daniel whipped his head toward her, his jaw tight. "Mom, stop," he snapped, his voice low but sharp. The pastor awkwardly cleared his throat and pushed on, clearly trying to get the ceremony back on track. But the damage was done. My cheeks burned beneath the veil. Every word of my vows felt heavier, like I was speaking through quicksand, knowing half the room was wondering what Linda meant by her little comment. When it came time for the rings, Linda actually stood up. The sound of her heels clacking down the aisle made everyone's heads turn. My maid of honor stiffened, ready to block her, but Linda raised her hands innocently. "Oh, relax, I just wanted a closer look," she said sweetly. Then she turned to me and whispered, her voice like ice, "Careful not to drop it, dear. Wouldn't want to start your marriage with bad luck." My blood ran cold. I held onto the ring like my life depended on it, slipping it onto Daniel's finger with steady hands even though my heart was pounding. The ceremony limped along, but I could feel the tension thick as smoke. People weren't watching us anymore. They were waiting to see what Linda would do next. And she didn't disappoint. When it came time to kiss the bride, Daniel lifted my veil with a trembling smile. Just as our lips met, Linda made a loud, exaggerated sigh, then muttered to the woman beside her, "Poor boy, he could have done better." That was it. My mother's head snapped around, her eyes blazing. Half the guests froze mid-applause. And me. I stood there, veil falling, a smile still plastered on my face while my entire body shook with rage. Linda had crossed the line from petty to vicious. And she wasn't done yet. Because the real humiliation she had planned? It was waiting for us at the reception. The church debacle should have been enough. Any normal person would have been satisfied with the attention they stole. But Linda wasn't normal, and she wasn't satisfied. By the time we arrived at the reception hall, I was already exhausted from holding myself together. The venue was stunning. Golden chandeliers, polished wood floors, flowers draped across every table. It was the kind of setting I'd dreamed of since I was a little girl. And Linda was determined to poison it. The first crack came during the entrance. Our DJ announced us as husband and wife, the music burst through the speakers, and Daniel and I walked in hand. Cheers erupted. Glasses clinked. I almost let myself believe the tension from the ceremony had dissolved. Until Linda stood up. Instead of clapping like everyone else, she loudly called out, "Oh, look at my son. Doesn't he look handsome? Such a shame the suit doesn't fit him quite right. Tailoring must not have been in the budget. The laughter that followed was thin and awkward. I saw Daniel's face flush with anger, but he clenched his jaw and sat down beside me at the head table. He wanted to let it go. I wanted to strangle her. Dinner came, and with it, Linda's second act. She took it upon herself to help the servers by walking around the tables and loudly commenting on the food. "This chicken is a little dry, don't you think?" she said to a group of Daniel's college friends, holding her fork up like evidence. Well, Claire did choose the caterer. First big decision as a wife, I suppose. My grip tightened around my champagne flute. One of my bridesmaids whispered, "She's testing you. Don't give her the satisfaction." But the worst was yet to come. After dinner, it was time for speeches. My father gave a heartfelt toast that had everyone wiping their eyes. Daniel's best man told stories that had the whole room laughing. And then, Linda rose from her seat. I could feel the dread ripple through the room like a cold wave. She clinked her glass with a spoon, smiling sweetly, her white dress gleaming under the chandeliers. "Well," she began, "as the mother of the groom, I suppose it's my duty to say a few words. And don't worry, I'll keep it honest." That last word sent a shiver down my spine. She started with Daniel, of course. My son has always been such a kind, hard-working boy. Smart, handsome, generous. Any woman would be lucky to have him. Then her gaze slid to me. The smile didn't waver, but her tone shifted, sharp, condescending, meant to wound. "And Claire? Well, Claire is spirited. She tries very hard, bless her heart." I wasn't sure at first if she was quite prepared for this role. But Daniel insisted. And what Daniel wants, Daniel gets. The air in the room turned heavy. Forks froze mid-air. A few guests gasped. I stared at her, my face burning. She was tearing me down at my own wedding, disguised as a joke, with everyone watching. But then, just as she leaned into the microphone to twist the knife further, something happened. A slip. A mistake. And the humiliation she'd planned for me began to turn back on her. Linda's voice echoed through the hall as she leaned closer to the microphone, clearly enjoying the way every single pair of eyes was glued to her. She had rehearsed this moment. I could tell. This wasn't off the cuff, it was calculated. She smiled that tight, condescending smile and continued, "Now, I know some people had their doubts about this marriage. I mean, Claire isn't exactly." And then it happened. A sharp clatter rang out. Linda's wineglass, which she'd set too close to the edge of the table in her dramatic flourish, toppled. Deep red wine spilled across the white satin of her dress, soaking it instantly. The gasp that rippled through the room wasn't for her words. It was for the sight of the bride, in white now covered in what looked like bloodstains. Linda froze. For the first time all day, she didn't have a snappy remark. She just stood there, staring down at the spreading stain, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The silence stretched for a beat too long. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice cut through the tension. "Guess she should have worn a different color, huh?" Laughter erupted. Real, unrestrained laughter. At her, not with her. Guests covered their mouths, trying to hide their smirks, but it was too late, the room had turned. Linda's face flushed crimson, darker than the wine soaking her dress. She tried to recover, dabbing at the fabric with a napkin, but every blotch just spread the stain further. The once elegant gown now looked ruined, garish. And in that moment, the power shifted. Her honest speech was forgotten. Her attempt to humiliate me dissolved into her own very public embarrassment. Even Daniel chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. I sat there, my heart still pounding, but for the first time that day, I allowed myself a real smile. Linda cleared her throat, her voice suddenly shaky. Well, these things happen. Let's move on, shall we? But no one was listening anymore. The image was burned into everyone's minds, the woman who had dared to wear white at her son's wedding, standing there in front of hundreds, dripping red down the bodice of her gown like some tragic parody. Her mask had cracked. And once it cracked, it wouldn't take much for it to shatter completely. Because the reception was just beginning, and Linda still had plenty of chances left to make a fool of herself. The difference now. People were finally watching her for what she really was. The DJ announced it was time for our first dance. The lights dimmed, a soft golden glow spread across the floor, and Daniel took my hand. For a moment, the chaos of the day melted away. It was just the two of us, swaying slowly to our song, his arms steady around my waist, his eyes locked on mine. But of course, Linda couldn't leave it alone. Just as the song reached its sweetest point, there was movement on the edge of the dance floor. Linda, still in her stained white gown, swept toward us like she was the star of the show. People murmured, their phones already lifting to capture what they knew was about to happen. "Mind if I cut in?" she asked, loud enough to echo through the hall. Daniel stiffened. His grip on me tightened. "Mom, sit down." But Linda smiled, ignoring him. It's tradition for the mother to share a dance with her son. "Don't be rude, dear." Gasps, whispers. She was twisting it, making it seem like we were the ones breaking tradition if we didn't allow her to interrupt. Daniel glanced at me, torn between his fury and the weight of every eye on us. I took a breath, forcing my voice calm. "Of course, Linda. After this song." It was the perfect compromise, polite, respectful, impossible to argue with. But Linda's smirk faltered. That wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want to dance. She wanted to steal this dance, the most intimate moment of the night. She tried again. "Oh, come now, Claire. You've had him for all of 5 minutes. Let me have one." The room went cold. It wasn't playful. It wasn't sweet. It was possessive, a claim staked in front of everyone. Daniel's voice cut through the tension, low and sharp. "Mom, enough." The song ended with a swell, and the applause was louder than usual. Not for us, but for him, for finally saying what everyone else was thinking. Linda stood frozen on the edge of the dance floor, her stained dress glowing under the lights, her face tight with frustration. She'd wanted to humiliate me, to show the crowd she still had power over Daniel. Instead, she was left standing there alone, looking small and bitter. But she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. During the father-daughter dance, she whispered loudly to the table behind her, "Well, Claire's father never really approved of this match, but I guess he's putting on a brave face." My father heard her. His jaw tightened, but he didn't stop dancing with me. He just leaned down and whispered, "Let her drown in her own poison, sweetheart. Everyone's watching now." And he was right. The tide had shifted. The guests weren't amused anymore. They weren't charmed. They were uncomfortable, and worse for Linda, embarrassed for her. By the time the DJ called everyone to the floor, I could see people actively avoiding her. Conversations died when she approached. Smiles tightened. But Linda wasn't the type to notice when she'd lost a crowd. She thought she still had one last chance to win it back. And she was saving it for the cake cutting. By the time the waiters rolled out the towering 3-tiered cake, the reception hall buzzed with nervous anticipation. Guests weren't just waiting for cake, they were waiting for Linda's next move. Everyone could feel it coming. The cake itself was gorgeous. Smooth white fondant, delicate sugar flowers spiraling up the sides, tiny edible pearls catching the light. I had picked it out months ago, agonizing over every detail because I wanted it to be perfect. And it was, at least, until Linda decided it should be her stage. Daniel and I stood side by side, the knife poised between our hands, the photographer ready. The crowd leaned in, phones raised. And then, just as the DJ announced, "The bride and groom will now cut the cake," Linda swooped in. Literally. She glided forward in her wine-stained gown and snatched the knife handle from between our hands, laughing loudly. "Oh, don't mind me. Just making sure no one messes it up." Gasps exploded across the room. I froze, my smile stiff, my heart pounding. The photographer lowered his camera. Daniel's face darkened, his jaw locked so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Linda, oblivious, or pretending to be, lifted the knife dramatically. "This cake is too pretty to ruin with clumsy hands. Let Mama help." Her words echoed. Clumsy hands. Another jab, another attempt to make me look foolish in front of everyone. But karma has a cruel sense of humor. As she lifted the knife, her hand slipped on the handle slick with condensation from the champagne glass she'd just been clutching. The blade tilted, the weight unbalanced, and before anyone could stop her, slam! The knife plunged sideways into the cake, toppling the fragile sugar flowers, slicing a jagged crack down the pristine fondant. A collective groan filled the hall. The perfect cake now looked mangled, like a shipwreck sinking into buttercream. Linda gasped, staring at the ruin she'd created. "Oh, oh dear, I didn't mean." Too late. Phones flashed, recording every second. Guests whispered, some outright laughing. One of Daniel's cousins muttered loudly, "Guess that's what happens when you try to steal the show." Daniel ripped the knife out of her hand and slammed it onto the table. His voice was low, furious. "Enough, Mom." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda, flushed and shaking, looked around for sympathy, for someone to back her up. But no one moved. No one spoke. Even her own husband, quiet, reserved Mr. Caldwell, kept his eyes fixed on his drink. And then the applause started. Not for her. For us. For me and Daniel, standing side by side, cake ruined but unbroken. The room had chosen its side, and it wasn't hers. Linda had wanted to humiliate me. Instead, she'd humiliated herself in the most spectacular way possible, caught on camera, immortalized forever. But the night wasn't over. She still had one last card to play, and it would be the one that finally broke her. The ruined cake sat there like a crime scene, its collapsed sugar flowers scattered across the table. The photographer, bless him, quietly moved on to candid shots of guests laughing and dancing, trying to salvage what he could. But everyone in that hall knew the story of the night wasn't the vows or the flowers or even the food, it was Linda. She should have stopped there. A normal person would have. But Linda wasn't normal. She couldn't bear being the butt of the joke, the subject of whispers and side eyes. And so, she tried one last time to take back control. It came during the bouquet toss. The DJ called all the single ladies to the floor, music blasting, women laughing as they lined up. I turned my back, bouquet in hand, ready to toss it over my shoulder. The crowd counted down, 3, 2, 1. And then Linda shoved her way through the line. Gasps and groans erupted as she elbowed past Daniel's cousin, nearly knocking over one of my bridesmaids. And there she stood, at the very front of the group, a 60-year-old woman in a wine-stained gown, clutching at the air like she was 20 again. The bouquet sailed. I didn't even mean to, but my throw landed it squarely in Linda's hands. She snatched it triumphantly, lifting it high like she'd just won Olympic gold. The room didn't cheer. Instead, the laughter that broke out was sharp, biting, merciless. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" Another muttered, "Pathetic." Even the DJ hesitated, his smile faltering as he tried to keep the energy up. Linda twirled, expecting applause, but the sight was absurd. An older woman in a ruined white gown, clutching a bouquet meant for hopeful bridesmaids. She looked desperate. Ridiculous. And then the worst thing happened. For her, at least. The MC, trying to lighten the mood, joked into the mic, "Well, looks like Linda's the next bride. Any lucky bachelors want to step up?" The crowd roared. Not with joy, but with cruel laughter. Phones flashed again, guests doubled over in their chairs. And Linda froze, bouquet still raised, her triumphant grin crumbling into horror. She'd wanted the spotlight, and she got it, but not the way she planned. Her husband stood then, slowly, heavily. He crossed the room, his face a mask of quiet shame, and whispered something sharp into her ear. Her shoulders stiffened, her jaw clenched, but she didn't argue. She just dropped the bouquet onto the floor, stomped back to her seat, and sat in seething silence. The room relaxed after that. The laughter shifted back to joy, the music swelled, and people danced again. But the damage was done. Linda had become the punchline of her own performance. And for the rest of the night, every time someone glanced at her sulking in the corner, they didn't see a powerful matriarch. They saw a bitter woman who had tried to humiliate her daughter-in-law and ended up humiliating herself instead. But the final blow, her complete undoing, wouldn't come until later, when the microphones came back on. By the time dessert plates were cleared and the dance floor thinned out, most of the guests had settled into a relaxed, cheerful rhythm. The chaos of the evening was fading, replaced with music, laughter, and clinking glasses. For a brief stretch, it almost felt like a normal wedding again. Almost. But Linda couldn't leave it there. She had already embarrassed herself with the dress, the cake, the bouquet, but pride is a dangerous thing. And hers wouldn't let her go quietly. When the DJ announced it was time for open speeches, a few guests offered sweet, light-hearted words, friends sharing funny college memories, relatives toasting to love and loyalty. Then, with a scrape of her chair, Linda rose. A hush fell over the room. She gripped the mic with both hands, her knuckles white, her face set in a strained smile. "I know some of you think I've been difficult tonight," she began, her voice shaky but loud enough to carry. "But I just want everyone to understand, I'm only looking out for my son." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Daniel shifted beside me, his hand pressing firmly against mine, as if to say don't rise to it. Linda pressed on, her tone sharpening. "You see, some of us have concerns about this marriage. Claire," her eyes locked onto mine, "comes from a very different background. A background that may not prepare her for the responsibilities of being a wife." The crowd stiffened. Chairs creaked. The air grew heavy, charged. She smiled wider, clearly mistaking silence for support. "I'm just being honest. Marriage isn't about pretty dresses or flowers. It's about commitment, sacrifice. And I worry," she drew out the pause, "that Claire may not be ready." Gasps. A few guests shook their heads, whispers rising. And then, before I could even open my mouth, Daniel stood. "Mom." His voice was sharp, cutting through the room. "That's enough." Linda tried to laugh it off. "Oh, Danny, don't be so sensitive. I'm only—" "No," his voice thundered, louder this time. "You've insulted my wife in front of everyone we love. You wore white to our wedding. You ruined our cake. And now you stand here and question her character. The silence was absolute. Every guest stared at Linda. Daniel's voice softened, but every word carried. Claire is the best thing that's ever happened to me. She is kind, loyal, stronger than you'll ever give her credit for. And if you can't see that, if you can't respect her, then maybe you don't deserve a place in our lives. The hall erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. A wall of clapping, cheering, whistles. People stood, raising glasses. Linda's face drained of color. She looked around wildly, searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. But all she saw were folded arms, shaking heads, and cold stares. She had tried to humiliate me. And instead, her own son had exposed her, laid her ugliness bare for everyone to see. For the first time that day, Linda sat down quietly. And for the first time ever, she had nothing to say. Linda didn't touch her drink. She didn't glance at the dance floor. She didn't even look at Daniel. She just sat there, rigid, staring at the tablecloth as the applause for his words thundered on. The shift in the room was unmistakable. For years, she'd relied on fear, guilt, and her iron tongue to command attention. But now, her audience had turned on her. Daniel squeezed my hand and kissed my forehead, the gesture small but powerful. It said, "She can't touch us anymore." That's when Linda snapped. She shot up from her chair so fast it screeched against the floor. "You're all blind," she barked, her voice sharp and trembling. "Blind to what's right in front of you. Claire is manipulating him. You'll see. One day, you'll all see." Gasps cut through the hall. Guests froze mid-dance. Her husband, Robert, finally stood too. For most of the night he'd been quiet, almost invisible, but now his voice was heavy with finality. "Linda, sit down." She spun toward him, eyes blazing. "You too. You're taking her side." "I'm taking Daniel's side," he said firmly. "I'm tired of this. Tired of you embarrassing yourself. And all of us." The words landed like a slap. Linda's mouth fell open, stunned, as whispers spread across the room. For once, she wasn't the accuser, she was the accused. Her eyes darted around, desperate, searching for even a shred of support. But the only thing she found was silence. Faces turned away. Friends refusing eye contact. Family members shaking their heads. Finally, with her face flushed and her dress still stained, she shoved her chair aside and stormed toward the exit. The bouquet she had dropped earlier still lay wilted on the floor. Her heel crunched over it as she pushed open the doors and disappeared into the night. The room exhaled. A bridesmaid muttered, "About time." Daniel's cousin whispered, "She's not coming back from that." And then, as if to seal it, Robert raised his glass. "To Daniel and Claire, may you build a marriage stronger than the storms around you." Cheers erupted. Glasses clinked. The DJ raised the volume, and the hall bloomed back to life. Linda was gone. And for the first time all day, I felt free. But the final twist, the part that still makes me shake my head, was yet to come. Because the next morning, Linda tried to rewrite the story. And failed spectacularly. The morning after the wedding, Daniel and I were still in that soft haze of exhaustion and relief. We lay in bed at the hotel, laughing over little details from the night. His best man's terrible dance moves, my uncle's tearful toast, the photographer tripping over the smoke machine. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a group message from his mother. I'll never forget the audacity of those words. "I think we can all agree last night was a disaster, caused by Claire's immaturity. She clearly wasn't ready for marriage, and I only tried to save my son from embarrassment. I hope people understand the truth. My stomach turned. She was spinning it, trying to rewrite the story as if I had been the problem, not her. But what Linda didn't realize was that the entire evening had been captured. Dozens of phones, photos, and videos. Her white dress, her honest speech, the bouquet fiasco, the cake catastrophe. It was all there, in crystal clarity, already circulating through family group chats. Within an hour, replies flooded in. Daniel's aunt, Linda, you embarrassed yourself. Not Claire. His cousin, own your behavior for once. Even Robert, her own husband, wrote simply, stop. Enough. The silence that followed was deafening. No defense. No allies. Just Linda, typing, deleting, typing again, and then disappearing from the chat entirely. Later that week, Daniel and I visited his grandparents, who hadn't been able to attend. When we walked in, his grandmother hugged me tightly and whispered, I heard everything. And sweetheart, you handled yourself with grace. Don't let her steal your joy. That was the moment it really sank in. Linda hadn't destroyed me. She had destroyed herself. Her attempts to humiliate me had backfired so completely that she became the family cautionary tale. At dinners, people still laugh about the wine dress and the bouquet snatch. No one mentions her with fear anymore, only pity. As for me, I walked away from that wedding with more than just a husband. I walked away with proof that dignity is the strongest weapon you can carry. I didn't need to scream or stoop to her level. She dug her own grave. All I had to do was let her. And now, every time I see the photos, the ones where Daniel and I are smiling, surrounded by love, while Linda sulks in the corner, I know exactly how the story ends. She tried to humiliate me. But in the end, she shamed herself instead.